So good afternoon or good evening, thank you. So as Stephen mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you today a bit about how we recognize people who are unfamiliar to us. And I'm going to be contextualizing that in terms of how we match unfamiliar faces to their photo IDs, which is probably what happened to every single one of you at the bar right when you came in, right? I know it always happens to me too. And so I initially got interested in this research because I did my graduate training in Arizona. And I moved there from Ohio, and when I got my driver's license, even though I was in my early, mid-ish 20s, my ID remained valid until the day I turned 60. And so in Arizona, you are simply trusted to look at yourself in the mirror and think, I've put on about 10 to 15 pounds, and then go get yourself a new photo. Anybody in the room ever think that? Yeah, I see one vague hand back there. Kudos to you. I don't either. And more recently, I had to get a new passport photo. And at great personal risk, I'm going to show you this passport photo. So I go to Walgreens. I thought I looked okay. I was wrong. Right? That's bad. So clearly I've been exsanguinated, I had all of the blood drained out of my body, and I thought there's no way I can put up with this for 10 years. So I thought, okay, I'll get a blood transfusion and do whatever I can do to not look like Kylo Ren. And so, because I do. And so the very next day, I go to a different Walgreens, hoping that it would turn out a little differently, and it did. And I put a little more effort into my appearance that day and also thought maybe I should smile. And so I straightened my hair, I put on makeup, I tried to smile in the photo, and that's what I ended up with. Right. 24 hours apart, these photographs were taken. And apparently I got a really wicked tan in that time. And what struck me about this is not just how just brutally awful both of them are, and I'm going to take them away because it's embarrassing, folks, is those pictures not only barely resemble each other, but I like to believe, the vain person inside of me, that maybe they don't look all that much like me either. And so that's really the crux of what I study, is do your photographs actually look like you so that somebody else looking at them can appreciate whether you are who you claim to be with your IDs. And although Stephen said there is no test, we're going to start with a test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you two photographs side by side, and I would just like you to say yes or no as soon as you make a decision. Say yes if you think that the identities depict the same person. They won't be identical photographs, so it'll be a lot like what you see on your IDs. And just say no if you think they are representing two different people. Okay. Understood the instructions? We're good? Okay. I'm going to ask you to be loud and proud, and I do teach undergrad, so I'm very comfortable with uncomfortable silences. I will wait until there is a majority responding, and I'm okay with it. All right, ready? They match. They match. They do not match. The no's have it. All right, y'all got that one. Good job. Yes. They are the same person, and one more. They do not match. And so that wasn't terribly fair of me. I selected these from a database specifically because I knew that they would trip up the majority of the people in the room. So it's not always that challenging, but it is pretty darn challenging. So most of the individuals depicted in this data set are younger adults, and their photographs were taken no more than 2 years earlier. Your passport, by contrast, is valid for up to 10 years. And so you can imagine all the many changes that occur between this moment and when you finally present that passport to somebody at border security. And so this just sort of underscores the fact that this unfamiliar face identification is challenging. People are generally not good at it. And it's easy to demonstrate in this sort of setting when I handpick the stimuli in order to mess you up. But there are some real-life circumstances where this has happened and had clear, applied, economical, psychological consequences for the people involved. One of my favorites came about 6-7 years ago. There was a church tour group in Iceland, a bunch of people on the bus. They were really only familiar with each other from their connection through the church. And as they were going through their tours, they would stop at various places. People would get on the bus, off the bus, but it was always the same group. And after one of the stops, they actually had to halt their tour because one of the individuals on the tour was reported missing. And they only had vague descriptions of the person. So she was about 5'5", Asian, 35 to 45 years old. And this effectively ended their tour. And it also launched a 3-day search effort for the woman who was missing. And it turns out after 50 hours of searching, including the helicopter searches in the wilds of Iceland, that the woman was actually part of the search party. She thought to herself, I'm about 5'5", 35 to 45 and Asian. I wonder if that's me. And it turns out when they finally did a head count, that was her. What happened was she got off the bus, and as you do when you're on the bus for a very long time, you freshen up. She changed her sweater, she fixed her makeup, she got back on the bus, and all of a sudden, nobody recognized her anymore. And they didn't recognize her to the point that they reported her missing. Other less consequential, although the cost of the helicopter is probably a lot, other less consequential aspects of this involve people who can pick up boarding passes at the airport. So a number of years ago, there was a man whose apparent hobby was to pick up dropped boarding passes at the airport. Because if you ever go through security, how much time do they really spend looking at you? And whether or not your name matches the name on your ID. Turns out it's not a lot of time. And he was able to successfully fly across the country number of times. Now, of course, these are sort of funny instances where unfamiliar face recognition goes wrong. There are others where there are economical and serious consequences that go along with it. So is anybody in the room a professional notary public? Hey, you're about to hate me. Just wait. But people who are professional notaries public are often charged with witnessing legal transactions, financial transactions, transfer of powers of attorney, property, etc. And one of their jobs is to make sure that the people in front of them doing the signing are who they claim to be. But it turns out that it's remarkably easy to steal somebody's driver's license and impersonate someone during one of these transactions. And in a famous case in China, so not a US notary, but a Chinese notary, a famous actress's husband had his driver steal the driver's license and then use it to sell off some of their property. There are more serious cases involving notaries and fraud in that domain. So a number of years ago in Palm Springs, a group of criminals killed a wealthy art dealer and stole his driver's license, took it to a notary public, and then transferred almost all of his assets into their account. They were eventually caught because the notary recorded a fingerprint in the logbook, and they remembered that and tried to kill him too. But you can get away with a lot of crime just by getting access to somebody's photograph ID, as long as you look just enough like them. Many of you, whoops, that was the headline for it. Many of you may remember the case of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. It disappeared a number of years ago, still hasn't been recovered, and one of the things that this case really brought to light was the fact that a lot of passports are never scanned against the Interpol database of known missing or stolen passports. And that's not even saying anything about people who sell their passports in order to get money. So 2 men were able to board that aircraft using fraudulent passports, so they depicted real people but not them. And although they were cleared of any wrongdoing, it really highlighted a major security loophole in many airports, which is that all you're going on is a photograph of someone you've probably never seen before to determine whether they are who they say they are and they are safe to get onto the airplane. So this is a challenging and also very applied psychological process that it turns out people aren't very good at. So what do we know about unfamiliar face matching? Well, one thing that we know already is that it's easy to get away with, right? So those two guys got on that airplane with little to no trouble. But there was also a study back in the late 90s done in the UK by Kemp and colleagues. For a long time, there were credit card companies who suggested that putting your photograph on your credit card would prevent people from being able to steal it and use it. So that when you go and you present your ID to the cashier's job is to verify that you are the person who is depicted on that card. And although that might be a great deterrent to fraud, Kemp and colleagues were interested in determining whether or not it worked to prevent fraud when someone actually had a fraudulent ID. So they had cashiers at a supermarket who were knowingly participating in this study agree to have their behavior measured, and participants were fake customers. Their job was to go through the supermarket, purchase a few items, and then pay for them with a wallet, a black wallet that concealed whether or not the photo depicted them or not, because they didn't want any behavioral clues to give away whether or not the person was paying with a stolen credit card. And so, although the cashiers knew that they were being tested, and the black wallet that concealed the credit cards should have been a tip for them that this is a critical customer, be on the lookout for a stolen ID. What Kemp and colleagues found was that they accepted, on average, 50% of the stolen credit cards that did not depict the person who handed it to them. And what I love about these data and what I find astounding about them is that it's not just when the person with the card is a look-alike. So when Wednesday Addams is possessing my ID, yeah, sure, she's gonna get away with it. But if it's a blonde bombshell, apparently she can get away with it too, about 35% of the time. And so even people who know that they're being tested are still subject to failure when it comes to matching someone they don't know to a photographic depiction of them. But these are just cashiers, which is not to denigrate their profession, but maybe they're not invested. There's very little personal consequence for them if somebody gets through with an ID that maybe doesn't depict them. What about border security? So White and colleagues investigated this with Sydney passport officers. And what they did, was they presented people with IDs, much like what you see there. The ones that I've surrounded in black are depictions of the same person. So those two men at the top are in black and those two women at the bottom in black match. The job was to determine whether the face that is not surrounded by a border matches the other two. And so for ease of presentation, one of those sets depicts all one person, and one of those sets depicts two different people. So, a little more audience participation. Which one of the sets do you think, top or bottom, depicts all three identical people? You guys are great. Sydney passport officers, however, not so much. So they compared their performance, the Sydney passport officers, to undergraduate participants. These are people that we usually use as convenient samples in our studies. We compensate them in various ways, and we are eternally grateful for their participation. So when you look at the IDs that match, you can look at the percent correct for both the students and the Sydney passport officers. And what you can see is there's no difference. Those stats nerds in the room, I know there are no error bars on these graphs. However, you can appreciate that they're virtually identical. But the matching IDs aren't really the big issue. What the real important thing to do when you're a passport officer is to spot the frauds, right? To see the person who is presenting you somebody else's ID. Surely, the Sydney passport officials are gonna do better there. And they don't. So they perform just like the undergraduate participants at spotting the imposter. And so this research really inspired some more work that I've done recently with the National Notary Association. So this is when you're going to hate me. So what I was looking at was whether professional notaries public are better at lay people at this task, because notaries are in most states required to hold liability insurance to guard against bad notarizations, whether it be something to do with the financial documents or, in line with my interests, you basically notarize a document for someone who is not who they claim to be. And in talking with notaries, the most common time that this happens is either with powers of attorney transfer, and so in cases of elder abuse, for example, or in spousal disagreements. So for example, if a man and a woman are divorcing, the woman may get her brother to impersonate her husband and transfer assets and property into her name only. And so the first thing, and I'm not even going to show you the data to go along with it, was that the notaries did not perform any different than the undergraduate students that I compared them to. I also compared them to bank tellers, who also are in charge of verifying that the people who present to them IDs are who they claim to be, and they didn't perform any differently either. So I'm not going to show you those data. What I am going to show you is the effect of occupational experience for people who are often held personally or professionally liable for these unfamiliar face matching decisions. And so the first graph I'm going to show you is their performance plotted by their years of experience. Because there were over 1,100 wonderful and lovely volunteers in this study. And they had experience ranging from just got my license, nothing, all the way up to 50 years of experience. And what you can see is what we're looking for is sort of an upward tick in their performance. What we're looking for is with years of experience comes the expertise that suggests that they've gotten good at it. And that's not at all what we see. So what we see is with matching IDs, there's no relationship whatsoever between the ability to spot somebody and match them to their proper photograph. There is similarly no relationship when the IDs do not match. So spotting those stolen IDs, it doesn't matter how long you've been on the job. But again, these were a wildly varied sample. So some people had no experience whatsoever, they had just gotten their license, and some had been notaries for up to 50 years. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they do it all the time. So some notaries, for example, will work in banks or in other businesses, and they're just, the resident notary, the person everybody goes to. And so they'll maybe do it once a week, maybe once or twice a month. And so the next series of graphs I'm going to show you is the impact of weekly experience. So how often do these people notarize documents for individuals with whom they are unfamiliar, so not coworkers? And what we see is when the IDs match, there's nothing there. And similarly, there's nothing there when the IDs do not match. There's a slight upward tick, but don't get excited about it. Statistically, it is not a reliable upward tick. So even these individuals who have a vested interest in making sure that they do this job correctly don't seem to be impacted by various factors that we think would impact them, such as years of occupational experience or amount of weekly experiences doing this job. In fact, the only reliable predictor of performance in this study was age. Such that performance got worse with age. So it's a really pessimistic and terrible article. Don't read it. But I learned a lot from it. I also learned a lot about what notaries do, and I'm still not sure I know everything that they do. There is, however, one group of people who seem to outperform lay people like me at this task, and those are forensic image analysts. So White and colleagues compared face matching performance, like we've been doing this time, with forensic image analysts, people who work for the FBI but do not serve in the analyst capacity, and of course our favorite sample, the undergraduate students. And what they found was that individuals who were trained as forensic image analysts finally outperformed the undergraduate sample, which is great. So what these individuals do for their job is kind of what you see on shows like CSI and its various cousins and offsprings, and there are like 8 of them now. But you've probably seen it on some TV show at some point where they take a grainy security footage of somebody's face and they run it through a database and they're like, oh, it's the Unabomber. And it just pops up like that, right? It's not exactly how it works. Close, but not quite. So what usually happens is the computer algorithms will compare the similarity of that photo to a bunch of stored photos in its database, and it will give a lineup of potential matches. And it's the analyst's job to use sophisticated software that triangulates, geometric positions of features to determine whether one of them is a match to the person in the photo. And so they are trained to really focus on the minutia of a face. Things that most of us typically don't appreciate, such as, the width of the bridge of somebody's nose and how that changes when they change the orientation of their face. So these people seem to do better than control. So what is it that they do without their software that maybe we can do in our own practice to get better at this? So what's their secret, essentially? And a couple of years ago, there was a facial identification scientific working group where they identified a method of best practices for comparing an unfamiliar person to their photo ID. And the acronym is ACE-V. And so we're going to walk through each step of the acronym, and we'll try it out to hopefully get a little better at spotting imposters. The A, of course, stands for analysis. We as humans, as animals with faces, we tend to prefer faces, and they are special to us. There are parts of our brain that preferentially light up when we look at faces, and they get trained over a lifetime of experience, even though we do come out of the womb with a preference for that sort of facial pattern. So do chimps. We're not that special. The second step is to compare the two faces. What are their similarities? And then discount those. Focus on the dissimilarities and spot things that are different about these two faces. We have a natural tendency to sort of believe the best in other people and see these two images as matching. So how do we get out of that rut? And then evaluate. Are those differences that you spot between the two faces something that you can explain away, either through aging, makeup, weight gain, weight loss, etc.? Or are they things that should potentially raise your red flags and say to you that maybe that person is not who they claim to be? And the last step is really an easy one. I don't know why they tacked it on here, but it's verification. So how do you feel about that decision? And do you need more information in order to support it? And so we'll step through each of these and we'll do some practice to hopefully start breaking faces down in a way that we don't normally break them down. Because when we look at faces, like this guy up here, we tend to just see a face. Most people don't look at that image and think, oh, there are two eyes, there's one nose, there are two lips, and they're close together. We look at the face and we see a face. But what we need to start doing is breaking it down into its constituent parts, making it more monstrous and focusing on those features and the relationship between these features. And this is not easy to do because we are, as I mentioned, born with a preference for that facial pattern. So much so that most of us often see faces in clouds, for example. It's called pareidolia. So most of you probably see smiling face. If that one doesn't work for you, perhaps you're more of a holy toast kind of person. You might see a woman's face in the toast, maybe Doritos, your favorite snack foods, or Kate Middleton in a Jelly Belly. We can't help ourselves. If you're interested, there are entire subreddits devoted to seeing faces where they should not be, and they're hilarious. But it's the way we usually process faces, and we need to stop doing that if we're going to be able to match somebody's unfamiliar face to their unfamiliar photo. And so when you spot these similarities and dissimilarities, you want to focus on features that you don't typically think of. So for example, this image is taken from the Facial Identification Scientific Working Group. And what you'll note is that the arrows are pointing to diagnostic features that we would typically not think of as being part of the face. So when we think of a face, we think eyes, nose, lips, chin, things of that nature. We don't often think about where the wrinkles are located. Or, really helpful in diagnostic, what do the ears look like? So technically in your passport photos, you're supposed to have your hair, if you have long hair, behind your ears. Because the matcher can use your earlobes and the way your ear bends, where it meets your face, to determine whether you are likely who you claim to be or not. And so the things you need to ignore are those external features that are easy to change. So going back to my embarrassing passport photos, my skin color is easy to change based just on lighting or on tanning lotions, beds, the sun. That's not going to be diagnostic. Neither is my hair. In the one photo, it was kind of messy and looked wet. And in the other photo, it was frizzy and straight. It's really easy to change the way someone's hair looks. But in Western societies, we put a lot of emphasis on hairstyles. And so we look at it a bunch when we shouldn't. So what I'm going to show you now, and it's not on there, is it? It is on there. So this is a face and a matching photo. I love this guy because he grew up a lot in just 3 short years' time. So if you could see his photo, he's kind of a baby in that fake driver's license. That is not his real name. That's all made up in the laboratory. And that is a recent photo of him with his grown-up facial hair. And what I'm going to play for you is the eye movement overlay of 2 observers. One of them will be depicted in teal, and one will be depicted in purple. And at the end, I would just like you to guess which color, teal or purple, was able to accurately appreciate that that baby-faced boy became that scruffy-faced man. So who do you think got it right? Okay, I can see you if I move off to the side. How many hands for teal? All right, teal got it right. Teal was the victor in this race. And what you can see that purple did kind of wrong is purple spent more time looking at those external features. So looking at the beard, looking at the hairstyle. Those are all things that are really easy to change. And that change simply by virtue of aging. What you want to do when you're looking at the faces is focus on the internal features. There's actually some research by some folks in the UK. It's called the headscarf effect. So when individuals as a society typically experience women wearing headscarves, they actually do better, generally speaking, at unfamiliar face identification tasks because they're used to looking at the internal features of the face without any distraction from the hair. So the next thing that we're going to do is focus on the E in the ACE-V method, which is evaluate. So when you've got 2 individuals, you're going to immediately appreciate some of the similarities between them, right? So I'm showing you 2 women who are of approximately the same age. They're both white women. They have, generally speaking, it's black and white, but it looks like the same hair color. And what I'd like us to do is just step through some of the differences that we think we can explain away. So right off the bat, what are some of the differences between these 2 women's faces, and they are different people, that you think you can explain away? Eye color, that was great. Nose, I heard eyebrows, nostrils. So we're getting this identified right off the bat, and this is not in any way exhaustive. We're hair, eyebrows, and eye color. All of those things are really trivially easy to change. And I heard some folks shout out some other differences that I also found myself. So there seems to be differences in the shape of the mouth, the differences in the shape of the nose, and those are all some differences that are a little more challenging to explain when we think about, makeup and aging. And I guess maybe with the lips, she could be sucking in her lower lip in one of the photographs. But one of those 2 blue arrows should probably be changed to red meaning that we can exclude her as matching the woman next to her because those features are just so very different that they cannot possibly be the same person, barring plastic surgery. Yeah, say it loud and proud. Nose, yeah, front row. The nose. The shape of the nostrils, I heard that from over here also, is really indicative that perhaps these are not two of the same person. So again, barring plastic surgery, which is a potential, that is a difference that you should be on the lookout for. But at first blush, if you just very quickly glance at these two photos, kind of like the TSA does when you fly anywhere, you're not really going to appreciate those subtle differences between the two faces. Because if I were to look at them, I would think, close enough. So we'll do one more. And I did not animate this one because I'm going to ask you to do it for me. Are these two women the same or different? They are different. So what are some of those differences that are either unexplainable or exclusionary that we think disqualifies? Mouth shape, hairline was fabulous. Eye shape, yeah. Nose shape, exactly. So when you break the faces down into their constituent parts, hopefully it becomes easier to spot the imposters. I'm actually doing some work right now with a colleague at Texas A&M San Antonio, where we're comparing undergraduate populations to local bartenders. Because although the TSA probably doesn't encounter many fake IDs, I'll bet the bartenders do. Because if you've ever, is anyone here from San Antonio? There's nothing to do there. So the bartenders probably spot a lot of fake or stolen IDs. So we'll let you know in the future. And the last step, of course, is the step that I said was a little pointless. It's verification. So if you are ever tasked with making sure that someone is who they claim to be, you might not have enough evidence in front of you. And so on the one hand, you could just ask for a little more information. So many people are tempted to ask for details off of the ID. So tell me your birth date. I teach college kids, they're good at memorizing stuff. And so one of the things they might not memorize, if they've memorized the birth date or the address, for example, is what's your sign? They might know that the birthday is April 25th, but will they know, is that a Virgo? Is it a Taurus? Most people in the room, however, probably know their astrological sign. Even if you don't check your horoscope or care about it 2 licks, you probably know it. And so, I guess if there are college students in the room, memorize that too. The other thing that individuals can do, and research supports the utility of this, is just asking for another photo. So show me another picture of you. Because the more pictures you have of the person, the easier it is to sort of hone in on the central tendency of the features that really make them who they are. So the more representations, you have a better idea of the features that define that person. And so, long story, just a tiny skosh longer, unfamiliar face identification is really challenging. It impacts people in a variety of fields. So, when students take exams in my classes, we ask them for their ID, but knowing full well that we will not know if they are lying to us. It's just a minor deterrent to cheating. Bartenders need to know this information, and clearly airport security, professional notaries, public need to appreciate that this is a lot harder than most people think it is, especially when we see faces in our coffee cups. And if you're tasked with doing this sort of thing, something to keep in mind is that the mutable features on someone are not at all diagnostic. You can change your hair color, you can shave off your eyebrows, you can contour like a Kardashian and look really, really cheekbony. It's easy to fix all of those things, so you have to discount them, try to ignore them, which is tough. Focus more on the unexplainable differences. So if the IDs or the ID is close enough to the person in front of you, don't let close enough be good enough. Look at it and focus on the things that really separate that photo from that person. And if that's not enough, ask more personal questions. Do you have a selfie in your phone? Do you have a student ID? What's your sign? That sort of information will be really tough to possess. by someone who is an identity imposter. And so with that, I'm sure I've gone over time, but I'd like to thank LSU ORED for organizing this. This is so much fun. And of course, my frequent collaborators, my grad students Laura and Juan, and the funding sources that help pay for some of this.